long before modern Sweden became known for peace, technology, and beautiful cities. The land was covered with thick forests, icy mountains, and small farming villages. Thousands of years ago, people survived by hunting animals, fishing in frozen lakes, and farming the hard northern soil. Life was difficult, but the people of Scandinavia were strong and fearless. Around the 8th century, a new era began, the age of the Vikings. The Swedish Vikings were among the greatest explorers and warriors in history. Unlike the Danish Vikings, who mostly attacked Western Europe, Swedish Vikings traveled eastward through rivers and forests into lands that are now Russia and Ukraine. They traded furs, weapons, honey, and slaves with powerful empires like Byzantium and the Arab world. The Vikings built long wooden ships that could travel across oceans and shallow rivers. These ships made them fast and dangerous. Villages across Europe feared the arrival of Viking warriors. But Vikings were not only raiders, they were also traders, explorers, and settlers. In Sweden, Viking society was divided into farmers, craftsmen, warriors, and chiefs. Powerful local kings ruled different regions. One of the most important areas was Uppsala, which became a spiritual center of Norse religion. People worshipped gods like Odin, Thor, and Freya. Huge ceremonies and sacrifices were held in pagan temples. As trade increased, Swedish Vikings became wealthy. Silver coins from the Middle East were discovered in Swedish lands, showing how far Viking trade routes reached. Viking influence spread across the Baltic Sea, and Swedish warriors known as the Varangians helped create early Russian states. But change was coming. By the 10th and 11th centuries, Christianity began spreading into Sweden. Missionaries arrived from Europe, trying to replace the old Norse gods with the Christian faith. At first, many Vikings resisted. Battles were fought between pagan chiefs and Christian kings. Slowly, however, Christianity gained power. One important ruler was King Olaf Skakkenam, often considered Sweden's first Christian king. He helped unite different regions under one kingdom and strengthen ties with Europe. Churches replaced pagan temples, and Sweden slowly became part of Christian Europe. The Viking Age eventually ended, but its legacy never disappeared. Viking courage, exploration, and warrior culture became a major part of Swedish identity. Even today, Viking history remains one of the most famous parts of Sweden's past. This was only the beginning of Sweden's journey. In the next part, Sweden will enter the medieval era, where kings, wars, and power struggles will shape the future of the nation. After the Viking Age ended, Sweden entered a new chapter of history. Christianity spread across the land, and churches began appearing in villages and towns. Priests replaced Viking shamans, and the Old Norse gods slowly faded into legend. But Sweden was still not a fully united country. Different regions had their own local rulers, and powerful noble families constantly fought for control. Kings often struggled to keep authority over the entire land. Civil wars, betrayals, and political chaos became common during the Middle Ages. Despite these conflicts, Sweden slowly grew stronger. During the 12th and 13th centuries, Swedish rulers expanded their influence into Finland. Swedish kings and Christian missionaries traveled eastward, bringing Christianity and Swedish control to the region. Finland eventually became an important part of the Swedish kingdom for hundreds of years. At the same time, trade and cities began developing. Towns like Stockholm grew rapidly because of their strategic locations near the Baltic Sea. German merchants from the Hanseatic League became influential in Swedish trade. Iron, copper, timber, and fish brought wealth into the kingdom. One of the most important figures of this era was Birger Jarl, often called the founder of Stockholm. He strengthened Swedish law and helped create a more organized government. Under his leadership, Sweden became more stable and connected to the rest of Europe. However, Sweden soon faced foreign domination. In 1397, Sweden joined the Kalmar Union, a political union that united Sweden, Denmark, and Norway under one monarch. The union was mainly controlled by Denmark, and many Swedes became angry about Danish influence over their kingdom. The Danish kings heavily taxed Sweden, and tensions between Swedish nobles and Danish rulers increased. Rebellions broke out repeatedly. Swedish leaders wanted independence and freedom from Danish control. The conflict reached its darkest moment in 1520. The Danish king, Christian II, captured Stockholm and invited Swedish nobles to a grand celebration. But the celebration turned into a massacre. Over several days, many Swedish nobles, priests, and leaders were executed in what became known as the Stockholm bloodbath. The massacre shocked Sweden. One young nobleman escaped the killings, Gustav Vasa. Furious over the Danish brutality, he traveled across Sweden gathering support for rebellion. Farmers and miners joined his cause, and a massive uprising began against Danish rule. After years of war, Gustav Vasa successfully defeated the Danes. In 1523, Sweden finally broke free from the Kalmar Union, and Gustav Vasa became king. This victory changed Swedish history forever. Sweden was now an independent kingdom, ready to rise as a major European power. In the next part, Sweden will transform into a mighty empire feared across Europe. When Gustav Vasa became king in 1523, he began rebuilding Sweden into a powerful and centralized kingdom. He reduced the power of the church, collected heavy taxes, and created a stronger government loyal to the crown. One of his biggest decisions was breaking away from the Catholic Church and adopting Protestant Christianity during the Reformation. Church lands and wealth were taken by the king, making the Swedish monarchy far richer and more powerful. After Gustav Vasa's death, his sons continued expanding Sweden's strength. Over time, Sweden transformed from a small northern kingdom into one of Europe's greatest military powers. The 17th century became Sweden's golden age of empire. Sweden developed a highly trained army famous for discipline and speed. Swedish soldiers fought fearlessly even against larger enemies. Powerful kings dreamed of controlling the Baltic Sea and dominating northern Europe. One of the most famous rulers in Swedish history was King Gustavus Adolphus. He was a brilliant military commander who modernized the Swedish army with new tactics and mobile artillery. His leadership made Sweden a feared power across Europe. During the 30 Years' War, one of Europe's deadliest religious conflicts, Sweden entered the battlefield to support Protestant states against Catholic empires. Swedish armies won major victories in Germany and shocked Europe with their military skill. Although Gustavus Adolphus died in battle in 1632, Sweden continued expanding. At its height, the Swedish Empire controlled Finland, parts of Germany, Estonia, Latvia, and areas around the Baltic Sea. Stockholm became the center of a growing empire. Sweden's success brought wealth, but it also created enemies. Neighboring countries feared Swedish power. Denmark, Poland, and especially Russia wanted to destroy Swedish dominance. Years of continuous warfare exhausted the kingdom. Then came King Charles XII. Charles XII became king at a young age and quickly proved himself as a fearless warrior king. He spent much of his life on battlefields, leading soldiers personally into combat. At first, he won incredible victories against much larger armies during the Great Northern War, but eventually disaster struck. Charles XII invaded Russia, hoping to crush the growing Russian Empire led by Peter the Great. However, the harsh Russian winter, hunger, and constant attacks destroyed the Swedish army. In 1709, Sweden suffered a devastating defeat at the Battle of Poltava. The loss changed everything. Sweden's empire began collapsing. One territory after another was lost to enemies. Russia emerged as the new dominant power in Northern Europe, while Sweden's era as a great empire slowly ended. In 1718, Charles XII died during a military campaign in Norway. His death symbolized the end of Sweden's age of conquest and endless warfare. After decades of bloodshed, Sweden was exhausted. The nation now faced a difficult future, rebuilding after the fall of its empire. In the next part, Sweden will transform from a war-driven empire into a modern, peaceful nation. After the fall of the Swedish Empire, Sweden was no longer the feared military giant of Europe. Years of war had drained the economy, destroyed lives, and weakened the kingdom. The people were tired of endless conflict. A new period began, one focused less on conquest and more on survival and rebuilding. During the 18th century, Sweden slowly recovered from its losses. Political power started shifting away from absolute kings toward parliament and noble families. This era became known as the Age of Liberty, where the Swedish parliament gained greater influence over national decisions. At the same time, education, science, and culture started growing. Swedish scientists and inventors gained fame across Europe. One of the most important figures was Carl Linnaeus, who created the modern system for naming plants and animals. His work influenced biology around the world and made Sweden respected for knowledge instead of warfare. But life for ordinary people remained difficult. Most Swedes were poor farmers struggling with harsh winters and limited farmland. Famine and disease often spread through rural areas. Many families could barely survive. In the 19th century, Sweden experienced major change. Industrialization began transforming the country. Factories, railways, and new industries created jobs in cities. Sweden's rich natural resources, especially iron, timber, and water power, helped fuel economic growth. However, poverty was still widespread. Millions of Swedes decided to leave their homeland in search of a better life. Between the 1800s and early 1900s, huge numbers emigrated to the United States. Swedish communities appeared across America, especially in the Midwest. Meanwhile, Sweden also changed politically. In 1809, Sweden lost Finland to Russia after a major war. This was a painful blow because Finland had been part of Sweden for centuries. Later, Sweden entered a union with Norway in 1814, though the union peacefully ended in 1905. One important decision shaped Sweden's future forever: neutrality. After witnessing the destruction caused by European wars, Sweden avoided direct involvement in many conflicts. During both World War I and World War II, Sweden officially remained neutral. Although the country faced pressure from powerful neighbors, it escaped the massive destruction suffered by much of Europe. After World War II, Sweden entered a period of extraordinary prosperity. The economy boomed, industries expanded, and living standards improved dramatically. Sweden developed one of the world's strongest welfare systems, providing healthcare, education, and social support to citizens. Companies like Volvo, IKEA, and Ericsson became internationally famous. Sweden also gained a global reputation for human rights, diplomacy, and peaceful policies. The country transformed itself from an empire built on war into one of the world's most modern and stable societies. But modern Sweden would soon face new challenges involving immigration, identity, globalization, and social change. In the final part, the story of contemporary Sweden unfolds. By the late 20th century, Sweden had become one of the richest and most developed nations in the world. Its cities were clean and modern, its economy was strong, and its people enjoyed high living standards. Sweden was widely seen as a model of peace, equality, education, and social welfare. The Swedish government invested heavily in healthcare, free education, childcare, and worker protections. Citizens paid high taxes, but in return they received strong public services and economic security. This system became known around the world as the Swedish model. Sweden also became famous for innovation and technology. Swedish companies produced globally recognized products in automobiles, telecommunications, furniture, music, and digital services. Stockholm grew into one of Europe's leading centers for startups and technology. At the same time, Swedish culture gained global influence through music, film, fashion, and sports. Artists, athletes, and entertainers from Sweden became internationally successful. The country promoted an image of progressiveness, environmental awareness, and human rights. However, modern success also brought difficult challenges. During the late 20th and early 21st centuries, Sweden accepted large numbers of immigrants and refugees from war-torn countries in the Middle East, Africa, and other regions. Many people arrived seeking safety and better opportunities. Sweden's humanitarian policies earned international praise, but rapid immigration also created social tensions. Some communities struggled with unemployment, integration problems, housing shortages, and rising crime in certain areas. Political debates over immigration and national identity became increasingly intense. Meanwhile, globalization changed the Swedish economy. Traditional industries faced competition from international markets, while automation and technology reshaped jobs and society. Like many modern nations, Sweden had to balance economic growth with social stability. Environmental issues also became a major focus. Sweden invested heavily in renewable energy, sustainability, and climate policies. The country became one of the world leaders in green technology and environmental protection. In international politics, Sweden long maintained military neutrality, avoiding major alliances for centuries. But growing tensions in Europe, especially after Russia's actions in Ukraine, caused Sweden to rethink its security policies. In 2024, Sweden officially joined NATO, marking one of the biggest changes in Swedish foreign policy in modern history. This decision ended generations of military neutrality and reflected growing concerns about European security. Today, Sweden stands as a country shaped by many different eras: Viking warriors, medieval kings, imperial armies, industrial workers, and modern innovators. Its history is filled with both conquest and peace, struggle and prosperity. From icy Viking villages to one of the world's most advanced societies, the story of Sweden is a journey of transformation, survival, and reinvention across more than 1,000 years of history.
Enjoyed the video? Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more amazing stories and videos every day. Your support keeps the channel alive and motivates us to create even better content.